Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda. I am a disabled neurodivergent woman. I have autism, ADHD, a rare memory disorder called SDAM, and global aphantasia, which is the inability to experience any of the senses in my mind. And I have videos on all of these topics. Mostly my channel is a combination of a vlog style talking about my neurodivergent journey and also a bit of education. So on this video, I do want to kind of lean more into the educational aspect and do an Autism 101 video. I had a recent comment that inspired this video where somebody who said that they were kind of newly realizing that they might be autistic, but they are kind of overwhelmed with a lot of the terms and terminology. And there's a lot of misinformation on the internet about autism right now, as more and more is being learned and discovered, especially about late autistic females, AFAB, assigned female at birth. So I do want to start off by saying I am not a medical professional. This is just from my lived experience. There's an important saying in the autism world, nothing about us without us. And that came because a lot of organizations started to talk about and diagnose autism without really even consulting actual autistic people. The first thing I want to talk about is the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the diagnostic manual used in the United States and other countries for mental health disorders. And for autism, in the 2013 update of the DSM-5, autism is under three categories: Autism Levels 1, 2, and 3. Before that, there was another form of autism called Aspergers that has now since been removed from the DSM-5 and just put in as autism. There's a long history about the word Aspergers. I'm not going to go about it into this video. There are people who still identify because that's how they were diagnosed, and that's valid. But the term is being phased out as much as possible because, one, it separates Asperger's people from being different than other autistic people when we really all are the same diagnosis. And two, the word Asperger's was named after a Nazi. So, just for that reason alone, a lot of people want to disassociate themselves from that word. So as far as the levels 1, 2, and 3, there's still current talks now trying to find a different way to even talk about autism other than the levels. Medically, it is kind of important to have some differentiation because autism is such a spectrum, which I'm going to go into a little bit more about what that means. But basically, people who are level 3 require a lot more support than someone who is level 1. Often meaning a full-time caregiver. A lot of level 3 people are nonverbal all of or most of the time. In the DSM-5, there's going to be a list of characteristics or traits that if you meet a majority of them is where you will get your autism diagnosis. Right now, the DSM as a whole is written in language that is the medical model of disability, and it really focuses on deficits instead of any kind of strengths an autistic person might have, but this is the current diagnostic manual that we have to use. So, like for instance, one of the traits of autism is deficits in social and emotional reciprocity. And so most autistic people really struggle with communicating with other people, reading facial cues, making eye contact, not monologuing or info dumping about their special interest, which I will also talk about a little bit more. Just a bunch of different things that when they were getting together and saying, this is what autism is, they're like, this group of people struggles with these types of communication patterns. Kind of going back a little bit to the levels, level 1, 2, 3, prior editions of the DSM-5 had functioning labels. And so a lot of times you'll hear language around high functioning or low functioning, or sometimes mild or severe autism. And these functioning labels are not used anymore, and they are considered ableist language. For one thing, an autistic person's support needs and functioning actually varies from day to day, depending on a lot of factors. Somebody who is labeled as low functioning often will be looked in with lower regard than somebody who is labeled high functioning. But what it really comes down to is how an autistic person fits into society. If a autistic person is considered high functioning, what that really equates to is that they are less of an annoyance to people in society because they typically can mask and present as neurotypical and not be a bother. And so you can see how this is not a healthy way to look at a person's needs. Editing Amanda here. I often have to speak slow when I'm doing this section because low functioning and high support needs go together, and high functioning and low support needs go together, and my brain will want to swap these words just because they're all so intertwined. So right now we are talking about support needs. So level 1, 2, and 3 is low support needs for level 1 all the way to high support needs for level 3. Again, it's not super cut and dry. There are certain days that somebody who is autistic level 1 might have a lot more support needs than they would on any other day. I can't speak for somebody who is autistic level 3, but I'm sure their support needs, even within their range, also fluctuates from day to day. And a lot of that has to depend on whether or not they're in burnout, whether they're in a sensory overload, whether their bodies are regulated. This depends, plays into a lot. I'm also realizing in this video, one of the factors of autism can be speech patterns, and I have some videos on speech patterns, and I'm noticing I can even hear myself. I'm talking much more monotone. That's because when I do my vlog videos, I'm more comfortable, and so my voice, I can actually kind of go into more of a mask because I'm high. I can be high masking. When I am trying to relay information and trying to make sure that I'm being very specific and accurate, my voice goes much more flat and monotone. And I don't really have control over that. I don't know. On days when I am in burnout, my speech patterns are very much more slow. If I'm overstimulated, my speech patterns can get very fast and like hyper. And other times I can pass neurotypical and my voice and everything will fluctuate more typically. That's just a side note for my personal experience. And again, that's why I want to do this video, because having an autistic person actually talk about these traits of autism makes a much bigger difference than just reading them from a manual. So I talked a little bit about high masking. So the reason why a lot of women or assigned female at birth have been looked over for diagnosis or gone a good portion of their life undiagnosed is because we typically present differently than males, although there are a lot of high masking males that have also been undiagnosed until later in life or late diagnosed. And that's because we fall into a type of autism that is high masking. We actually pick up on patterns. So part of the autistic criteria is pattern recognition. And the thing is that females are very good at picking up the social patterns that are around us and being chameleon-like and mimicking. And so we get passed as neurotypical all the while struggling, not really understanding the social things that we were mimicking, always trying to fit in, but never quite fitting in. The problem with being high masking is that when you mask for so long, you get passed over, you don't get diagnosed autistic. And instead of being called autistic, you get labeled other things. Too sensitive, too talkative, too weird sometimes. Because you're normal enough to not be autistic, but you're not normal enough to be actually typical. And these are not medical. These are just how society and people and peers perceive us. So we get labeled a lot of unflattering terms instead of, there's nothing wrong with this, we're just autistic and our brain types are different than the majority of brain type. That would be neurotypical. So, okay, that's another Autism 101 phrase is neurodivergent versus neurotypical and neurodiverse. So neurodivergent is an umbrella of terms. Autism, ADHD, bipolar, dissociative identity disorder, BPD, which is, no, that's bipolar as well. It's a huge umbrella of disorders and differences that can make your brain be neurodivergent. And then neurotypical is the majority brain type. Then there's the word autistic versus allistic. So you can be neurodivergent and autistic, and you can be neurodivergent and allistic. So I have a friend who's bipolar, so she's neurodivergent, but she's not autistic, so she'd be considered allistic. Just it's the opposite of autism brain type. Oh, and neurodiverse. So if a company says we have a neurodiverse workforce, that means that it is neurodivergent people along with neurotypical people. That's two types of brain types together is neurodiverse. You've got a mixture. If it's all neurodivergent people or all neurotypical people, then that's not diverse. That's the separate, because neurodivergent and neurotypical are right now how scientists are kind of dividing brain types, even though not all neurotypical people are the same, right? Like everybody's different. Not all neurodivergent people are the same either, which then is a perfect segue into what is the autism spectrum. So a lot of times people think of the autism spectrum as a line, and you've got neurotypical over here and you've got like severe autism over here, which again, we don't use the word severe autism, but I'm just saying this is the stereotypical, the common way of thinking of autism before now we're trying to educate and bring people up to more current studies. So neurotypical all the way to severe. And then somewhere along this line is where somebody would feel like they are. So a lot of people feel like a lot of people have learned and assumed incorrectly that everyone can have a little autism. And if you go along this strip, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're mildly autistic all the way to here. But that's not actually how it works. And it's harmful to think that way. So we need to end that stereotype. Autism is yes or no. It's zeros and ones. It's you are autistic or you are not autistic. Think about pregnancy. A lot of times you'll hear someone say, I'm a little bit pregnant. And it's like, you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. Like you can't be a little bit pregnant. Pregnant, not pregnant. Autistic, not autistic. When we're talking about the spectrum of autism, we're saying, okay, you are qualified, you are diagnostically autistic, and they can do brain scans and stuff and DNA and like genetics also to find out if you're autistic. Of course, our science isn't good enough to do that in a quickly cost-effective manner, so we use these criteria to decide if someone is autistic or not. But once you're autistic, once it's like deemed, yes, you are autistic, then that's where the spectrum is. It's not a line of like, ooh, if I step over, now I'm autistic. You were born that way. You were either born not autistic, or you're born autistic. And the spectrum is this rainbow. I'm going to find this graphic, put it up here. And it's a rainbow of traits that start. And each individual autistic person has a spectrum of these traits where they might find themselves having more difficulties with that trait, and some of the aspects are more narrow. And what people will say that, oh, everyone's a little autistic, is because all of these things are human traits. And so you might have an autistic trait or not. Like maybe you are an allistic person, but you just really struggle with understanding sarcasm and you really like literal language. That doesn't mean you're autistic. That just means that that's just something that you may not be good at. While a lot of autistic people struggle with sarcasm and they really prefer literal language, maybe as an autistic person, you really, really studied it because you did not like at a young age that you didn't understand sarcasm. So you studied it really hard and now you're kind of almost an expert at it. And so that's not a deficit for you. The reason why people will maybe have autistic traits is because they are all human traits. They are all things that any human can have. The thing is, when you have this check mark, and when you have all of them and you struggle with these things on a daily, hourly basis, then you're autistic. If you have, oh yeah, I have 2 of these autistic traits and once a month, oh my God, I get so flustered by them. That's not a little bit autistic. That is a normal human doing normal human things. And not to say that autistic people are not normal. That was a misspeak. We are normal. We are just different. Different, not less. Okay, this video is getting long, so I did want to talk about a couple more things. So some other buzzwords you'll hear with autism is your special interest. Autistic people often, not always, again, spectrum, most often have one or more special interests, and engaging in and doing things about our special interests help regulate our bodies. When we are sensory overload, burnout, being able to focus on our special interest actually like regulates our brain and is really, really good for us. And in the past, a lot of times parents would use the special interest against an autistic person. They would say, do XYZ and then you can get a reward by doing your special interest. What neurotypical people do not understand is that it is like an itch that has to be scratched. When my brain gets focused on something and wants to do something, it is like that is the thing I can't, it's hard to focus on anything else until I can work on my special interest, and then it's like it can calm me down. You can see me getting really excited about this topic because once I realized this part of myself of being an autistic person, oh my gosh, it was just like unlocking like just such an amazing ability to find a way to help regulate me when I'm overwhelmed. And then that's another thing. So another autistic diagnostic criteria is having sensory overwhelm or overload. And again, with part of the whole spectrum thing, people can be hypo or hyper. So for instance, I'm hypersensitive to sounds. Loud noises really just grate on me and they cause my nervous system to get really upset. And I'm not talking about loud noises. I'm talking about lots of noises, like the dog's nails clickering across my wood floors and the sound that the cabinet makes when it closes. Like all these noises can just start to build up, especially the more overwhelmed I get. But then I'm and then a lot of autistic people are, again, hypersensitive to flavors and foods. So they really want a bland diet. But that's one where I'm hyposensitive to foods and I like a lot of flavors, crunches, textures. There's some autistic people who really crave loud noises. So they are hyposensitive to sound, and loud music in their ears helps regulate their bodies. So with a lot of the sensory things, the spectrum can be wide about where that autistic person's comfort level is. When you meet one autistic person, you're meeting one autistic person. We are so different in all of these things. We struggle with that sense, but whether or not we crave a lot of it or can't stand any of it is part of what the spectrum is. Oh, and then special interest again. Sorry. I did take notes, but like I'm autistic ADHD, and sometimes like the tangent thing is just part of how my brain works. And that's another reason why it's important to get this kind of information from an autistic person, because you are seeing live how my brain processes information and is trying its best to relay it to you. And here my brain's wanting to do a tangent. Okay, it kind of works. So special interest, a lot of autistic people really struggle with getting a career or working in a job. The ones that seem to be successful is if they can land a job that is related to their special interest. Second, within that special interest, you can have hyperfixations or hyperfocuses, and those can be related to your special interest. Like I have a special interest of fiber arts is like a broad term for it, but over the years that's included sewing, knitting, crochet, and currently embroidery, and those might be shorter periods of time. And a hyperfixation can be something that can last just for a very short period of time and you're over it. But during that time, it's really super intense. Like here's an example of a really silly hyperfixation that I had a couple of weeks ago on TikTok. A new filter was released called the Bold Glamour filter. And I just became so fixated on that filter. I watched every single TikTok that people were putting out using that filter. I was learning what was interesting to me about it was the social ramifications of this filter, the artificial intelligence included in the filter. It wasn't just like the superficial about the filter itself. It was all the people's reactions and social reactions to that filter. Like it went very deep, my interest, and I was interested in it for about a week, and then it's like done with it. Super. Okay, that was cool. It was really, and we'll do these deep dives, and we will just like immerse ourselves into a hyperfixation, and then as soon as it starts, our brain will shut it off, and we're done. And that can also last for a long time. Like I started a special interest of yoga, got super deep dive into it. Lasted 4 years. My brain switched it off, and while I still enjoy yoga, it's not the same as when my brain wanted it as a way to regulate myself. All right, well, I'm gonna wrap up here. I feel like I've covered a lot of topics. Let me know if you found this video helpful, if you would like me to go into any more detail about any of these topics, or if you would like another video similar to this. If you've heard some autistic buzzwords that you're still struggling with and you want to learn more about, drop them below, so that would give me an idea of where to go if I do a second video on this. If you relate to any of these, drop them down below so that other autistic and neurotypical people can read about it and hear more voices from our community, especially if you are diagnosed autistic level 2 or 3. Oh my gosh, I didn't go into that, but I'm just going to say it as one sentence. Self-diagnosis is valid in the autism community. That could be its own whole separate video. So I'm not going to continue on, but I just want to make sure that I get that in because it's so important of a sentence. And there's so many reasons, but Amanda, we're going to stop right there. Just, it's valid. Okay, if you'd like a separate video on that, I don't think I have done one, so I can. Just as a reminder to my subscribers, thank you so much for subscribing to me. I am going in for a foot surgery on Wednesday, so I'm not 100% sure when my next video will be. Hopefully I'll be able to at least do a community post. And until the next one, guys, bye.